Today I'm talking with Mike Tierney, COO of SpectorSoft. Welcome, Mike.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me.
So tell us what SpectorSoft does.
Sure. So we make user activity monitoring software that collects and records the activities of people, employees, contractors, insiders, if you will, as they interact with the resources and the systems they've been given access to. Our software is used by thousands of companies around the world, companies very large down to some of the smallest companies, to gain really critical intelligence onto what's going on inside the organization.
What are some of the reasons that these companies turn to SpectorSoft in the first place to monitor employee usage, I guess?
Sure, yeah, and it is a solution that has a wide number of use cases, unlike a very well-defined use case like an antivirus that's going to, you know what it's there to do. And companies use this for a number of different things. Productivity and efficiency are two common use cases that we see. So is Bob working is kind of the classic, and then also how is Bob or all of the Bobs working? So productivity standpoint, our customers that deploy us for productivity purposes and let their employees know that we're there tell us that they see market increases in productivity. On the efficiency side, we have customers that use the information that we can replay back, and we have a DVR-like replay capability in reviews and to inform training programs so they can coach employees to help them be more successful, or take best practices from successful employees and publish them more widely inside the company. So that's two of the kind of non-security related use cases we have. A big use case for us is employee investigation. And that was probably the first one for SpectorSoft in the corporate world. Basically, I need to confirm or deny a suspicion about an employee or a group of employees. And we're widely used for that, again, on companies throughout, from small businesses up through enterprises. For me, somewhat related to that is incident response. And our uses within the incident response world have an investigative flavor to them. But we're used in some of the largest financial services, healthcare companies, and manufacturing companies in the world in their insider response teams to get a better idea quickly on who did what, how, and when, so that they can both close holes and react to the situation that's happening. There's a parallel with kind of the eye in the sky in a casino, if you will. And if you think about what those systems are used for, they're there to detect problems as they occur so they can be dealt with immediately. They're also collecting evidence that can be used later on, both for disciplinary reasons and to help figure out better ways of increasing security. And then there's also a deterrent effect to them, and their mere presence gives them some benefits over and above the others as well. And that's something that we see a lot in the use case that we're getting, I think, the most traction from right now, which is security. I talked to a gentleman yesterday on the show floor who told me that most of the security companies he talked to were referring to Edward Snowden as VP of Marketing Ed Snowden. Mm-hmm. And he really has raised visibility into the insider threat and what the damage can result from that. And we're seeing a lot of interest around that.
Would you have been able to see Ed Snowden's activity, especially if he's got a bunch of terminal windows open and he's using hacker tools?
Yeah, it's a good question, and without really knowing exactly how he did it, I couldn't give you a definitive answer, but I can tell you that we see everything that a person does when they interact. So, we see communications before they're encrypted, because we're seeing them at the keystroke level. So, I want to say yes, I don't know enough. Sure. But on that, what's interesting is if there was a policy in place in that organization to monitor the activity of highly privileged users and to review it. And if they let those people know, there's a chance that deterrent effect, I think I'm going to get caught, would have come into play there.
Yeah, that's often the case.
Yeah.
The best security comes from that deterrence. If everybody knows they're being watched, and we've seen that with security cameras, right? It just keeps you from doing bad stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's the classic case of the bank teller, right? Those security cameras aren't to catch the bank robber. It's an extra layer of defense against the bank teller stealing money out of the teller. So can you explain the difference between your ideas of active and passive?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So we have a couple of different ways that we do monitoring. And the one that we've had out for a long time, we consider an active monitoring solution, and kind of what I touched on when we were talking about Mr. Snowden. An active monitoring solution is collecting data on employee digital activity, and it's making that data available for review, retention, and reporting In our case, we write it back to a secure on-prem SQL instance. We can also spin alerts off of that data. But someone is in there actively using it. It's used whether it's for investigations or things like privileged user monitoring. Passive monitoring, and we've introduced a new solution for this that's an industry first. We record and collect all of the same information, but we don't make it available for review, retention, and reporting. Rather, we store that information securely and hidden on the endpoint where it takes place for up to 30 days. Now, we can still spin alerts off of that. So if we detect something that the company has told us to look for, we can let someone know. But if there's never a cause to go look at that data, it remains unseen. So that it's a way of allowing companies to strike a balance between the security needs of the company and the privacy of their employees, but still have the data available if they need it.
I can see that being a big requirement inside healthcare.
Absolutely, that's one of the industries that's been very receptive to it. Financial services has been another early uptake for that product.
Law firms, I can imagine.
Yeah, we see some of those as well. Sure.
And I'm sure a lot of executives at any company would prefer to be in that mode rather than the constant oversight.
Yeah, I mean that's always one of the tugs of war. The higher up the stack that you go, and then who has the ability in the company. Who is it okay to review the information that I'm working on? Yeah. So the passive solution does give us some of those benefits where, as I said, it's there if you need it. And there's a number of use cases that we see from that. If you look at 1 out of 2 employees surveyed say that it's okay to take corporate data or IP with them when they leave a company. 40% of those people flat say that I'm going to use it at my next job. So that's a concern for any company. Where is my data going? Is it going to a competitor? You don't always know when someone's going to leave a company, and you don't know that I want to keep a closer eye on them in that period leading up to their notice. So if you have a passive monitoring solution in place, the data's there if you need to go back and look at it, so you can quickly make sure that everything's all right, and you can enforce the agreements that you have in place with someone as they're becoming a former employee.
Yep. Yeah, and engineers and developers are probably the worst culprits because they feel everything they create is theirs.
Yeah, you know what, and I do think that that's the case. I have a sales background, and it's common in sales to think, well, those contacts are my contacts, right? And so we see that a lot too. You'll see sales guys taking their database with them, and then using it in another company.
So back to the privacy issue, what are the best practices if you're deploying this to, I guess, bridge that gap between privacy and security?
Sure. So one of the goals we had when we designed this passive monitoring solution was to help companies strike a balance between security and privacy. What we found is companies are more comfortable looking at the digital activity of employees when they have a cause to, but they're resistant to doing it when they have no cause to. The issue that comes up is you don't always know who you need to look at until it's too late. Very common request that we got from customers, or a common comment, was we love the capabilities your product gives us once we install it, but boy, we wish we could see what happened leading up to us installing it. So the passive monitoring solution allows them to see, again, up to 30 days of history of activity, the activity that was occurring during that time frame that they were coming to the realization that we may need to take a look here. Woven through both the active monitoring and passive monitoring solutions, there's a number of privacy protections. Starting from role-based permissions as to who can review data, who can unlock that data from the passive monitoring solution and convert it over, alerts that can be created and sent out when that's done. So if you knight a single person in your company to have that capability, when they do it, an alert could go to the CEO or to the general counsel or the head of HR, whatever your process is determined is the right one for your company. And if they haven't approved it, they can go deal with that as a separate issue right away. In terms of best practices, we always tell our customers, one, to make sure they have an updated acceptable use policy so that their employees know what is and is not acceptable, to disclose that the company has the right and the means to monitor so that employees are not caught off guard by that and they can ask questions if they want to. And I think there are a few organizations on earth now that don't have something that you're either clicking through or signing when you're joining, acknowledging that. We encourage customers and prospective customers to get their legal and HR departments involved early, because those groups should be helping determine the process and procedures, both for employee investigation and for reviewing data on somebody that closely. So we encourage them to do that early on. We also tell companies to consider involving their employees in the discussion. I think if a company lays out its goals and as to why they're doing it, and can educate customers on the damage that an insider can do, or employees, excuse me, on a damage that an insider can do, then we see that employees are very willing to accept it and even embrace it, because it's for their protection as well. It's a very small number of employees in a company that may, go from insider to insider threat. So for the vast majority of employees, they're just happy that there isn't an incident of fraud or data theft that's going to drive the stock price down or impact the bottom line and potentially impact other people's jobs.
Tell me how you can help the incident response procedure, because I'm familiar with, grabbing the employee's computer and doing the forensics analysis on
Sure.
the hard drive, and yet that will show documents, but it won't show activity.
Yeah, so within incident response, what we see our software being used for historically, and then it's evolving a little bit, is to really get the answers as to who did what, when, and how very quickly, without having to necessarily go grab that hard drive. So once we're installed on an endpoint, you can see all the activity that's taking place. I mentioned earlier we have almost a DVR-like playback capability, so you even get away from needing to have some of those specialized skills to go out and extract data, for instance. And you're really not piecing together clues anymore. You're watching exactly what happened. And that can be replayed from a remote location so that the employee being investigated or looked at in the context of an incident doesn't need to know that you're there. So that's a lot of what we see. We see our incident response customers identifying the tentacles of something that's gone on. Was this a one-man operation or were others involved? And then also using it to look at the methods that were employed, whether it's fraud or IP theft or embezzlement, so that they can learn from those and then go back and inform both their security training policies for all employees, but then and the systems that they have in place to better prevent these types of things from happening. Now, what we're seeing incident response teams do now is deploy the passive monitoring solution more widely, because it was from those guys that we were getting the comments most often that if I could only see what happened leading up to that cause becoming apparent when I had to go look at someone. So they're able to get their answers faster and produce that evidence quicker if they need to and close those holes a little bit quicker.
Are there ever cases where it's used to prove innocence or demonstrate, hey, I did take that action when asked to, that positive thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and those cases do happen. We had a customer tell us a story, and I've told it a number of times, about a very top performing sales rep that they had, who one day downloaded 50 files, and they happened to be customer lists for the 50 states, and they were kind of concerned as to why a top rep would do that, and all the things that you would go through with a sales rep doing something a little bit out of the ordinary. Are they getting ready to leave? What's going on? So taking a look into what she had done, they then saw her attaching those 50 files to an email and sending it to a Gmail account. And they went into kind of a full, I believe, if I recall, the text of the email was, here are the files you asked for. And they went into something of a full-on panic mode. What they were able to do was go back in time before she did that and learn that Gmail address had emailed her earlier. Her boss was in another city for a meeting, needed those files, and his laptop had fried. So he was using another person's machine, and he sent an email from his personal account. So she was doing exactly what she was asked to do, and they were able to turn the red light off and avert a false positive and go back to business as normal. So we do see exactly that.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Something you said about being able to replay and learn from and create training tools made me think of this new DevOps trend where people are trying to get developers and operations to work more closely together.
Yeah.
And there's quite often an expert somewhere who just, as they're launching new applications, they fix everything. And they just can't tell you how they did it because they're not great communicators.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another good use case.
No, that is excellent. My friend Alan Schimmel will want to talk about that when I get back.
As would Gene Kim, who put it in the Phoenix project. So what's the future? Where do you see new developments coming, and how are organizations going to adapt to this capability?
Yeah, good question. So I think on a macro level, we're seeing people become more used to this type of monitoring or surveillance, if you will, and we've seen positive benefits from it. a terrible incident, the Boston Marathon bombing, but people saw the benefits of having all those security cameras around when they were able to identify who did it very quickly, and I believe avert another incident. So in general, we see that acceptance and the realization of the damage that insiders can do, creating a lot more opportunity and a lot more interest in solutions such as ours. For us, the future is somewhat to help educate people about the capabilities that we bring. One of the stories that I tell, and I'll try to do it quickly here, but when you put an alarm system on your house, you don't just alarm all the ingress and egress points. You put motion detectors inside, because if somebody does figure out how to breach your perimeter without tripping an alarm, well, you can still catch them on the inside. And really what we are in some respects are a motion detector inside the company. In terms of insiders inside a company, you've given them a way to come through the perimeter in terms of the permissions and access they've been given. We help people keep an eye on that, so to really tighten the security hole there. So we have a little bit of education work to do, and then the future for us is really on applying greater capabilities of pulling intelligence out of the data we collect. So there are things that we can do and that we're working on now to help make people aware of potential threats potentially earlier, and so that they can respond before insider risk metastasizes into an insider threat.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing that progress. And thank you very much, Mike.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard.